All right, so I want to start with a little bit of college football. And look, I get it. This is mostly a college basketball show, but since the last time I recorded, the biggest story in sports is the fact that LSU went to New Orleans, wins the national championship. So with all due respect to Duke losing, we will be starting with football. And as I record here, and by the time you guys listen, it'll be Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, Friday morning. We're going to be 48 hours, 72 hours removed from the game. So I'm not going to do the whole, well, in the second quarter when this happened. Like you guys know that's not what I'm about. That's not what I do. Do want to talk about a couple of the smaller picture kind of in-game things. And then I kind of want to talk about the bigger picture because I find the next, year as fascinating in the LSU story and the Joe Burrow story and the Joe Brady story. I find that what's to come as interesting as what happened. And as far as the game itself is concerned, look, I said on last show, I did in fact like LSU to win this game. I don't know if I gave a final score. It was not a game that I personally bet, even though I was in Vegas. I just felt like, look, it could be 38-35 LSU. It could be 38-16 LSU. I wasn't picking against LSU, though. And listen, I know that as the week kind of progressed, the talk was that early on, all the public money was on LSU. And it was really interesting, actually, because after I was done recording this podcast on, I guess it was Sunday afternoon at Lagasse's, I was actually talking to a guy that worked at Lagasse's, and he said that it was the most public, one-sided game of this magnitude in terms of a big, wide-scale game since the Super Bowl that featured the Broncos and the Seahawks. And in that game, the public was on the Broncos, and the Seahawks ended up winning that game. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, and I did think it was kind of interesting that Clemson was, while LSU was the very public team, over the final week or so, you kept hearing stories about Clemson being the favorite amongst the people in Vegas, and you kind of heard all these stories about, this sports book took $100,000 on Clemson, and this one took 2.1, like whatever. And I get it, and I understand that professional bettors have metrics that we don't have access to. I understand how all this stuff works. What I knew was that I simply wasn't betting against LSU, and it's as I told you on the last show. I bet against LSU against Texas. I bet against them against Florida. I bet against them against Bama. I was just done betting against LSU. I was just done because this was a story that was bigger than metrics, bigger than computers, bigger than data, and we may actually get into a little bit of data and all that kind of stuff in the mailbag coming up, but it was bigger than that, right? Like you can have all the metrics you want. LSU already beat Florida and Georgia and Alabama and Oklahoma and Texas A&M and Auburn. Like, I don't need metrics to tell me that they are the better team, and that's no disrespect to Clemson. And then on top of that, you have the Heisman Trophy winner, the game's in New Orleans. It just didn't feel like LSU was going to lose this game. So LSU wins. I'm not surprised. I picked LSU. Am I surprised it ultimately ended up being a 3-possession game? Of course I am. Listen, Clemson's a great program, and I know that a lot of people on Tuesday night or Tuesday morning, Monday night, whatever, use this as a referendum on Clemson and the ACC is so bad and blah, blah. Don't listen to that crap. Clemson's a great team. They are a great program. Trevor Lawrence obviously didn't play his best game, but you don't win 20-whatever games in a row, 29 in a row coming into this game if you're not a juggernaut, and you don't come into this game, period, if you don't beat a good Ohio State team in the semifinal. And yes, for those of us that watched the game, Ohio State was the better team and deserved to win. So to me, I just didn't see the scenario where LSU was going to lose this game, and they didn't. And of course, once they win it, all the questions kind of pop up. Are they the greatest team ever? And what is this? And what is that? Like, look, I don't know if they're the greatest team ever. I think it's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 years before we can really realistically have that question. I understand they're the only team that's ever gone. Well, they're one of only 2 teams to go 15-0. Clemson doing it last year, LSU doing it this year. They played, I think you can legitimately argue, the toughest schedule in college football. I believe that 7 teams in the final top 10 they played and they beat, obviously. And so, like, you can have those arguments. I don't know if they're the greatest team ever. I mean, listen, the team that I've always said is the greatest that I ever saw was the 2001 Miami Hurricanes with Ed Reed and Andre Johnson and Jeremy Shockey and Clinton Portis and like all these guys. And they're a team that had 22 first-round draft picks. They had 5 guys drafted in the first round after that year. They set a record with 6 first-round picks in 2004. And so, like, I don't know where LSU is going to be compared to those guys 5 years from now. What I can tell you right now, though, is I don't know that I've ever seen an offense like that. And it's crazy because during the game, as I was watching it, I was thinking like, man, I have never seen an offense like this. And of course, I thought about tweeting something or saying something or whatever, but I was hesitant because, as I told you last week, there's always but guy on Twitter that wants to tell you you're an idiot. And if I said something to the effect about LSU being the greatest offense I've ever seen, I just assumed I'd get well, what about the 2003 Texas Tech Red? They put up 72 points. Like I knew I was going to get something stupid, or like, when Timmy Chang was at Hawaii, it's like, dude, shut up. I thought they were the best. I wasn't sure, but that was the conversation coming out of that game. And I really do believe that not only do I believe it's the best I've ever seen, not only did other people, I just can't even remember anything even remotely like it. And I understand that there's been great offenses at Oklahoma, and there's been great offenses before I was born, before many of you were born. But man, I mean, just think about it like this. Just think about the fact this team averaged 48 points per game, and they played 6 of the top 30 defenses in college football. Think of it like this. They averaged 48 points a game with a schedule that included Clemson, that included Georgia, that included Florida, that included Auburn, that included Texas, that included Texas A&M, that included Oklahoma. I think I said Bama, but in case I forgot, Bama. Just think about that schedule. They average 48 points a game. And so I've never seen anything like this offense. It really is incredible. It really was fun to watch. And I don't think we've ever seen anything like it. I would say this, Joe Burrow, and we're going to get to the next couple years of Joe Burrow's career in a second. I've never seen anything like what Joe Burrow did. 60 touchdown passes in a season, 65 touchdowns accounted for against the schedule that he played. That's 4 touchdowns a game against, again, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M. I can't even remember all the great teams that they played. I'm sure I missed somebody, Auburn, Florida, whoever. I missed some people. But I've never seen anything like what Joe Burrow did. By the way, kind of not being talked about. We're so busy talking about the team and Joe Brady. I've never seen Ed Orgeron. I've never seen a coach run through the victories over great coaches like Ed Orgeron did. I mean, think about it like this. There's only 5 coaches in college football with national championships, and there's only 3 that have won a national championship in the last decade. Jimbo Fisher, Dabo Swinney, and Nick Saban. And obviously, Saban and Swinney have won multiple national championships over the last decade. Ed Orgeron beat all 3 of them. The only other 2 that have won national championships are Les Miles and Mac Brown. I don't even know that they count because they're at, kind of these outskirts in college football. And so when I look at what Ed Orgeron did, as I tweeted on Tuesday, think about the bingo card. I mean, he could say bingo pretty quick with the names that he can check off on his list from this year. He beat Dabo Swinney. He beat Nick Saban. He beat Dan Mullen. He beat Gus Malzahn. He beat Lincoln Riley, Kirby. Just think about it like this. If you ask most people, name your top 4 coaches in college football, they would probably almost consensusly say in some order, Nick Saban, Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart, and Lincoln Riley. And Ed Orgeron beat all 4 of them, plus Jimbo Fisher, who's won a national championship, plus Tom Herman, who I know, like whatever. Let's all make our jokes about Tom Herman. Dan Mullen, widely considered to be one of the best coaches in college football. Ed Orgeron just beat him. Just beat Gus Malzahn, who's a pretty darn good coach, even though I know that at times he is criticized by many, including in his own fan base. So, I look at this whole situation, I say, man, I have never seen anything like it. But what I would also say, as great as that year was, and it might go down as the greatest team ever. It's certainly, I think you can argue, the most accomplished team ever, 15-0 with all the wins that I just mentioned, with the Heisman Trophy winner, record-setting quarterback Joe Burrow, best season in the history of the SEC, best season in the history of college football, Ed Orgeron, National Coach of the Year, Joe Brady, National Assistant Coach of the Year. I think what's fascinating is what is going to happen next. And I want to start with Joe Burrow. Listen, we have never seen anything like this, and this is something I'm confident in saying, is that we have never seen one guy go from one place in a year to where he is now. But what's been so interesting is exactly what I just said, is that what's so fascinating to me about the Joe Burrow story is that we spend so much time talking about, well, he was at Ohio State and he couldn't beat out Dwayne Haskins, and like Dwayne Haskins was a first-round pick, and like if that had gone different, maybe he'd still be at Ohio State. Like we spend so much time talking about the Ohio State aspect of it, and I get it. I understand that's a huge part of the Joe Burrow narrative. But here's the fascinating part with Joe Burrow to me. Everybody talks about the fact that he couldn't win the starting job at Ohio State. How about the fact that he wasn't even that good at LSU last season? Like, that's the part that's interesting to me. Forget the Ohio State stuff, because the Ohio State stuff, you can say whatever. Well, first he was behind JT Barrett. They changed offensive coordinators. All these different things happened. Dwayne Haskins was a first-round pick. Like, you can make the argument for why Joe Burrow didn't work at Ohio State. What's amazing to me is the fact that he wasn't even good at LSU last year. I looked up the stats to make sure that I was correct. These are real stats. You can look them up. They're going to sound like I'm making them up, but I'm really not. Joe Burrow at LSU last year as a redshirt fourth-year junior completed 58% of his passes for 16 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. He went from 58% completions and 16 touchdowns to the greatest season in the history of college football. That's freaking insane, man. That is insane. You know what it also says to me, though? Like, I think it's kind of an interesting conversation going into the NFL draft, right? Like we're all caught up with Tua and like, can he stay healthy? What's the deal with the hip? Like, at least when Tua was on the field, Tua was pretty much money from the second he stepped on the field until the second he left the field. When he was healthy, he's throwing dimes, he's setting records, he's completing this insane amount of passes. And you look at Joe Burrow, and it's an amazing story. But I guess my question is, like, as we get ready for the NFL draft, like, are we positive? Like, let's backtrack. I'm not saying Joe Burrow isn't going to be the number one pick. Joe Burrow is going to be the number one pick. He has earned that right. He had the greatest season I've ever seen from a college quarterback, especially considering the competition that he played. But this was a guy that completed 57%, 58% of his passes as a fourth-year junior in college. And now he is the consensus number one pick. And all I'm saying is, I think this is going to be a fascinating question going into draft season. Like I said, I think the LSU story for the last year has been amazing. But I think what's just as amazing is what's going to happen going forward, because we're all caught up in the LSU Joe Burrow hysteria right now. But I got to tell you, I'm just sitting here saying, like, he's going to be the number one pick. He should be the number one pick. If I was a GM, I would almost certainly take him number one. But, like, for a guy that was that good, that record-setting, like, I feel like there's some legitimate questions, and I feel like nobody's asking them right now. But I feel like once the euphoria of this season wears off, like, I do think, like, people are going to start asking, like, are we we're positive this guy should be the number one pick, right? Like we're positive Tua's hips like not healthy, and we're positive that Chase Young like kind of wasn't that good when the competition got like we're positive Joe, because I just look at Joe Burrow and I've never seen a leap year over year. There has never been a leap year over year in the history of college football. And so you have to assume you might be getting something closer to junior year Joe Burrow than I just think it'd be wrong to assume that you're getting senior year Joe Burrow. I'm hearing all these people that don't watch college football saying, I've never seen anything like it. He's the consensus number one, and he is. But I do think there are legitimate questions about him. Was it him? Was it the receivers around him? Was it the system with Joe Brady, the passing game coordinator that came to LSU? Because to me, that's the interesting conversation. Like, is Joe Burrow that good? Did he get that much better in 1 year? Or did he have great wide receivers? Did he have the perfect coach at the perfect time? And that was the X factor. I think that's fascinating. I would take it a step further. I know most of you saw this news, but I just mentioned Joe Brady, who won the Broyles Award as the top assistant coach in college football. He was only at LSU for 1 year. They have this historic passing attack. And on Tuesday, he announces that he is leaving LSU to be the offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers. I'm just saying, First of all, I was actually legitimately surprised that he decided to go out. For people who don't know the backstory on Joe Brady, the coordinator, I'm not talking about Joe Burrow, the quarterback. I'm talking about Joe Brady, the coordinator. Joe Brady was a guy that was an offensive assistant with the New Orleans Saints last year as of like 2016. So we're talking like 3 football seasons ago. He was like the assistant defensive backs coach at Penn State. He's an offensive assistant with the Saints. I'm not saying offensive coordinator. I'm talking offensive assistant. He basically threw on the side with JT Barrett during practice. Like I was reading reports about it. And that guy, in 1 year, Ed Orgeron saw something in him that nobody else saw. He comes to LSU. He implements this offense. They set all these records. He goes off to the NFL. One, like I said, I'm a little bit surprised only because I felt like maybe he might feel like he owes something to Ed Orgeron because Ed Orgeron kind of found him when nobody else did. But I also kind of understand the perspective from his perspective of like, one, I came from the NFL. 2, this is my chance to not only make a name for myself at the highest level, but it's my chance to make life-changing money. Because what's crazy is I don't know what his exact salary was with the New Orleans Saints, but it wasn't very much. And I think he made like $400,000 with LSU this year. And he was even saying before this national championship game, when he became kind of the buzz in college football, that like until a month ago he didn't have an agent because he didn't need an agent because there was nobody that wanted him as a coach. So he leaves the LSU for the Carolina Panthers. And one, again, for the last time, I'm surprised that he did it. I thought he might feel an obligation to stick around with Coach O. But now I think the fascinating question becomes this. LSU just had this amazing historic season. Are we sure that it's replicable for LSU? That's the fascinating part to me. That is the fascinating part to me, is are we positive that it is replicable for LSU? You lose Joe Burrow, who, whatever I think about him, whatever questions I have, it was the most historic season in the history of college football. And then you lose the coordinator that basically was the glue that brought it all together. And I'm just saying, listen, I love Coach O. I hope he goes on to win 3 more of these things. I think he's great for the sport. He's great for Louisiana. He's humble. He is who he is. He's not Nick Saban. He's not Urban Meyer. He's not super serious all the time. And, I take myself too seriously. And, he's like one of us, right? Like he's a dude that he's been fired. He's been low. He's been unemployed. I can't speak for all you guys and girls listening. That's been me. I've had low moments. I've had dark moments. So I hope Coach O stays. I think he's awesome. I think he's fun for the sport. But are we sure what LSU did is replicable going forward? You lose Joe Burrow, Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. You lose the offensive coordinator. And I got to be honest, as tough as that schedule was, LSU did get quite a few breaks this season. They got Auburn, Florida, and Texas A&M all at home. Now, they did have to go to Bama, so let's not discredit going to Bama and getting a win. They did get Bama without Tua, by the way, at 100%. Tua did play, but he wasn't 100%. Well, next year, think about the schedule. You don't have Joe Burrow. You're bringing in a quarterback that's basically never played meaningful minutes before. You lose your offensive coordinator, and now all of a sudden, you got Florida on the road. You got Auburn on the road. You got Texas A&M on the road. You still got Bama at home. You still got Texas coming in from the out-of-conference. So it will be fascinating to watch from not only Joe Burrow's perspective in the NFL, I'm fascinated to watch LSU in the next year. Is this something that can be maintained for the next year? Because I'm just not sure that it is. I'm just not sure that this is like this crazy changing of the guard. And it's funny because my buddy Ryan Fowler actually tweeted this the other day when Clemson lost. Last year after Clemson wins the national championship game, everyone would say, Alabama's dynasty is dead. Clemson's the new team. Well, Clemson's really good, but there are teams that are capable of beating Clemson. And when LSU beat Alabama, the question became like, okay, like has LSU now surpassed Bama? And I can't say that I'm convinced that they have. And I can say that from both LSU's perspective, from Joe Burrow's perspective, from Ed Orgeron's perspective, I am fascinated to see how the next year unfolds because I really do believe that we may look back on this season and say, man, think about all the stars that had to align. You have as good of a schedule as you can have relative to how many tough games you have. You bring in this coordinator for 1 year. You have a senior 5th-year quarterback with a chip on his shoulder. You have nobody believes in Ed Orgeron. Well, now Ed Orgeron's a national championship winning coach. Now people have expectations of him, and so I will be fascinated to see this unfold. By the way, the one X factor I haven't even talked about, which is another conversation for another day, now that Joe Brady's in Carolina, do they maybe try to trade up to get Joe Burrow? That's another conversation for another day. But again, I just think there are so many fascinating questions about LSU and about this championship run. We're so caught in the hysteria of it. We're so caught in everything that happened over the last year. I think the next year will be the equally fascinating part with LSU, Joe Burrow, and Ed Orgeron.